Live. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan.
GB News royalty with
Your perfect start to the weekend.
Lucky Us.
Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's almost too awful to want to debate, but we have no choice. Following the statement by Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, we will, of course, talk about the tragic, ghastly Southport stabbings. We'll talk about the freezing of fuel payments to 10 million pensioners. And Angela Rayner makes a big pledge to build 1.5 million houses. Just how realistic is that? All of that coming up in just a moment. But first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, if you've been watching GB News this evening, you'll have seen that a vigil has been held to remember the victims of the knife attack in Southport. Hundreds of people gathered outside the town's Grand Atkinson building to observe a minute's silence just over an hour ago. Our reporter, Will Hollis, is at the vigil.
A lot of people will be next to strangers right now, but they're coming together in shock, in grief, in pain, but united in the feeling that this is not what people want to see in their communities happening to the most vulnerable of people. The pain here is so much, and people are hurting in a way that few people hurt in their lifetimes.
Will Hollis there at the vigil in Southport. Well, earlier the Prime Minister visited Southport, paying tribute to the victims of the knife attack. He did face some hostile shouts from the crowd as he tried to lay a wreath on the ground there near where it happened. The Prime Minister says it is his mission now to crack down on knife crime.
I am very worried about high levels of knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined that my government will get to grips with it. But today is not the time for politics. Today is the time to focus entirely on the families who are going through such pain and grief, and on the wider community, and of course a time to say thank you to those that responded yesterday.
Well, the Prime Minister's visit to Southport came as Merseyside Police named the three little girls who've lost their lives. They are 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, 9-year-old Alice Aguirre, and 6-year-old Bibi King. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition in hospital after what was described by police as a ferocious attack. We now know the attack itself took place at a Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop, and the pop star herself has since paid tribute, saying she's still in shock at the loss of life and horrendous trauma, adding they were just little kids. Well, in other news today, an inquest has heard that the wife of the racing commentator John Hunt died from her stab wounds. The investigation into the triple murder found that their two daughters, Hannah and Louise, suffered fatal crossbow injuries. Kyle Clifford was arrested on suspicion of their murder, but is yet to be questioned by police because he's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. Victims of the post office scandal can now apply for compensation of £600,000 or more through a new scheme. Ministers say it aims to right the wrongs of one of Britain's most worst miscarriages of justice. Those who've been cleared will start receiving their letters this week, though some may need to submit further evidence. Critics are saying the letters are too late, with only 10 of them being sent out so far. And in Somerset, a 73-year-old woman has been arrested after a suspected noxious substance was released on a busy shopping centre in Bath. Shoppers fell ill, with 2 people taken to hospital for breathing difficulties after a woman approached them with a bag. Witnesses also reported seeing people being treated at the scene, with one woman being hosed down before she was taken onto an ambulance. Avon and Somerset police are investigating, and they're asking anyone with any information to come forward. That's the latest news from the GB Newsroom. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back at 8 o'clock. See you then.
A premeditated attack on young kids. It's the summer holes. Schools, of course, aren't there. Parents who work want to put their kids somewhere. Parents who are at home want to put their kids somewhere. And so for these youngsters to go to a little Taylor Swift party, a very normal activity, somebody willfully, deliberately, went in there with a knife, stabbed several youngsters and some of the adults looking after them, and it's now 3 young girls that have died. It is almost unimaginable to think that somebody on a premeditated basis could go and do this. I think it's the most shocking thing that has happened in the country since the Dunblane massacre. I can't think of anything in the intervening years that has shocked people so much, that has led to quite a genuine outpouring of grief on a very, very large scale. TV presenters almost unable to hold back tears. That's how we all feel about this. There are some questions that are unanswered. A Telegraph report said that the man in question had been watched by the authorities. We don't know the truth of that. What we do know is we're told it's a non-terror incident. Indeed, last week, when a lieutenant colonel in Kent in full uniform was stabbed in the street, he's still alive and in a very serious condition. Again, we were told it's a non-terror incident. I'm just asking questions because I'm struck that every time something appalling happens, we're told it's non-terror or it's mental health. There's nothing to worry our little heads about. We will, in the fullness of time, find out more, but given that the perpetrator is 17 years old, we may never find out who this person really is and what his motives were. I'm joined by Dame Andrea Jenkins, former Conservative MP, and Matthew Laza, former Labour advisor. Andrea, it's difficult to put into words how we all feel about this, isn't it?
Absolutely, Nigel. And I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, I'm a mum to a 7-year-old little boy, and seeing the pictures on the screen there of these beautiful young girls, it must be some sick individual who can go and do that. And it's inhumane, and as you said, there's so many questions that need answering, and I think the truth must come out. I think the community of Southport needs to know the truth.
Well, I think it's broader than that. Matthew, I think there is very interesting, during the election campaign, whenever the issue of law and order came up, and all the police statistics say that violent crime is falling and the world's getting better, I think we view all of that ever so slightly with a pinch of salt. What we do know is the number of young people carrying knives is going up. Most knife crime is not premeditated.
Yeah.
In the way that this
absolutely.
was. There is a difference here.
Absolutely, there's a difference. Yeah, most knife crime is people who are defending themselves, or so-called defending themselves. There's a lot of gang issues around knife crime in our inner cities. And I think this is it's the shocking nature of this in Southport, which is a relatively quiet town, the sort of more affluent suburbs of Merseyside. And I think you're absolutely right to say that it's probably shocked the nation in a way that nothing has since Dunblane, because it's the premeditation that I think really goes. Nobody can comprehend. And we've seen incidents with 2 or 3 people killed by knife attackers and others before, but they tended to be more, even if they're random in the street. The victims were sort of literally at random. If we think about Nottingham, it was a guy rampaging in the street, which is just in recent memory. This is the fact that he targeted children in a way like this, and I think that's what's really hit home, frankly, to everybody in the country. And it is a reminder to all politicians of all parties just how important issues of law and order and antisocial behaviour are, and how it isn't a party political issue in the sense that we should all care about it. Obviously, it's up to different parties to offer solutions.
It's party political in the sense of what do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Deal with it. I mean, it's very interesting when Keir Starmer went to Southport, and I'm not going to show the clip, but he laid a wreath. Yeah. And he was heckled by a member of the public.
Yeah, because the anger is just so visceral. Clearly, people wanted to express that anger, and I think he would understand that, that he's the target because he's the man ultimately in charge. And I think it's important that we do learn the lessons from this, and that nobody on my side of politics wants to. We need to find out exactly what happened, which we will do as the court process goes on, and we need to learn lessons. We need to know. We need to put nothing needs to be brushed under the carpet, however uncomfortable the lessons are.
Before I go back to Dame Andrea, let's just see what was said in the House of Commons half an hour ago with the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
What should have been a joyful start to the summer turned into an unspeakable tragedy. 3 young children have lost their lives. BB King, age 6, Elsie Stankham, age 7, and Alice da Silva Aguiar, age 9. The police have released some words that Alice's family have said. Keep smiling and dancing like you love to do, our princess. 6 other children and 2 adults are being treated still for their injuries in hospital.
That was the Home Secretary responding in the House of Commons. Quite emotional words.
Yes.
Quote from one of the parents.
I think everybody wants to know answers, though, don't they? You said there's so many questions there, Nigel.
This is...
I want to know the background of these individuals, what the motivation was, and also, I want to know how long they've been in the country. I mean, we've seen much of this before.
Yeah.
In
I think there was a lot of speculation online last night about who the perpetrator was, what the background was, and I resisted saying anything.
No, of course.
Until we found out the facts. What we do know is that the parents came from Rwanda, were let into the country as refugees at a time, of course, when those horrific massacres were going on between the 2 tribes. They settled in Cardiff. The young man was born in Cardiff and at the age of 6 moved up to the northwest. So we know that he was born in this country of refugee parents.
We don't know the background there, do we?
But we don't know anything about him.
Exactly.
And as I say...
Because he can't be named because of his age.
Because he's 17.
Absolutely, that makes it...
But there was this Telegraph report that he had been under watch by the security services.
Yeah, and we don't know...
Which is severely distressing.
Which is obviously worrying, and those questions will have to be answered as to, how is he being watched, why was he being watched, because this is actually... It's slightly... The attacks that Dunblane, for example, attacks on children like this haven't tended to be directly terror-related in the past, because it tends to be that terror targets signs of authority. But so it's interesting to see.
Well, it is.
It may well be. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying it's just. We so need to know the answers.
Well, Andrew, you've sat there in the Commons through several of these horrific incidents. Nothing as bad as this.
No.
How should we define terror?
We should define terror by anything attack on British civilization. And the British culture and way of life.
So ideological.
I think that's one way to do it, yes.
Yeah. I'm joined down the line by Dave Spencer, former Detective Chief Inspector and somebody who is head of crime and justice at the think tank Policy Exchange. Dave, I mean, obviously just horrific beyond words. We are attempting tonight on this panel to say we need some answers. Are we being premature with that, or is that what the nation really needs?
Well, I'm sure you're right. I think you echo what a lot of people will be feeling at the moment. And what I do know is that the police officers involved in investigating this will be conducting a meticulous investigation to try and get those answers, of course, primarily for the justice system through the criminal courts when that inevitably gets to that point. But of course, the family, the local community and everyone will be looking for those answers. And that is what the police will be trying to do. And they will have been working through the night last night. They'll be doing the same again today. And one of my reflections as I think about my former colleagues who will be investigating this horrific incident in Southport is that British policing comes in for a lot of criticism and certainly has done in the past. But what British policing is genuinely world class at, and I mean genuinely amongst the best in the world, is when these very horrific, very serious incidents happen. This is what British policing really is excellent at. And I have no doubt in my mind that while it may take time, we will get those answers in due course.
I don't doubt that, Dave, for one moment. But I remember the incident that took place just over a year ago in Hartlepool. There was a triple murder. There were virtually immediate restrictions put on in terms of what I could say on this programme, what anyone could report. And then it turns out 6 months later, we find out the identity of the perpetrator, which, had that information been released at the time, would have led to considerable outrage in Hartlepool and perhaps even demonstrations on the streets. And I don't know the particulars of this case any more than you do. I just get a general feeling that when these horrendous things happen, we're not quite being told the full truth. It's as if we're almost being protected from ourselves.
Yeah, certainly one of the principles that should be at the heart of our justice system is open justice. The public are entitled to know what is happening in our criminal courts, and you're absolutely right to raise that. I think if I can mention one of the other issues as well, you talked about some of and it goes to the openness issue about the sense of increasing crime and actually what the data says and these sorts of things. Certainly, when you look at the crime data, what we see is actually knife crime over the last 10 years has increased substantially. So about 10 years ago, there were about 26,000 offences in a year. The most recent figures are about 50,000. So over the last 10 years, we've seen a substantial increase in knife crime. And, this absolutely needs to be a priority for the new government and for the criminal justice system as a whole.
Well, unless we stop and search on the streets at random without fear of being told we're targeting various communities on the basis of their class or ethnicity, we'll never grip this, will we?
Well, stop and search. I mean, you are absolutely right. Stop and search is a key part of this, and there are other tactics involved as well. But stop and search has to be right front and centre of the solution to the knife crime epidemic. That goes along with sentencing requirements for those caught carrying knives. It goes with programs called focused deterrence, which is about targeting those who are involved in serious criminality. The reality is that we now have a pretty clear idea about how to tackle knife crime. And there's all sorts of things through enforcement, through prevention, through the criminal justice system. We now actually have a pretty clear idea how to do it. But what we need is a government and a criminal justice system who actually get on with it and do it. Who
actually does it. No, I agree. Dave Spencer, thank you for joining us. Now, it was a Taylor Swift party, and Taylor Swift has put out a statement tonight on this, just saying how bitterly she regrets what's been done, and quite right too. In a moment, we'll come back and we will talk about an issue that is not quite as vital, but if you're one of 10 million pensioners living in a country where gas prices are roughly 60% higher than they were 3 or 4 years ago, you might think what Rachel Reeves did yesterday was a bit of a shock.
weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Most people will be familiar with French artists such as Auguste Renoir, Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, who with others made up the impressionist movement of the late 19th century. But we are probably less familiar with the British contingent of the impressionists, artists like Frank Bramley, Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes and Walter Langley, amongst many others. David Messam is on a mission to change that. I'm joined by David Messam and by Patrick Duffy, an esteemed archivist. These people we're talking about, are they really impressionists? I mean, I assume they're British, but are they impressionists?
I think we had the same query when we wrote a book about the whole thing in '85, actually. And we were the book nearly went out as The Garden of Bright Images, actually, though my author then, Laura Wortley, was quite insistent that it should be called The Garden of Bright Images, but I thought it'd probably be put in the gardening section, actually. So, you know, the question you ask is what is on other people's minds, too, actually. Have we got impressionism in this country? I think for me, as I used to do quite a lot of shopping, if you like, in America, looking for English pictures out there, and they've got American impressionism, and I'm quite happy with it, but the English are different.
Were they friends and colleagues? Were they collaborators with the French Impressionists?
Broadly speaking, British Impressionism is, as we term it, is the post-Impressionist movement. So they were certainly inspired by the French Impressionist movement as it was, but they came later. They travelled around Europe and became attuned to en plein air painting, so painting outdoors, and that's what they brought over with them. We call it British realism, but there's a focus.
British realism, I kind of recognise.
Yeah,
I mean that's exactly what that looks like.
The People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Quite often on this show, we say, why did someone get such a ridiculously light sentence? Well, today, maybe it's the other way. The hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been sentenced to 28 years in prison. I'm joined by Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Unit. Chris, this is a pretty remarkable term, isn't it? What's happening here?
Nigel, it's a real satisfaction to see a man like this locked away for so long. You know, to some, he's a pathetic groomer of people to go and commit terror. But actually, he's also really, really nasty man who, because of his articulate ways and ability to speak to the camera, has got away with his actions for so long. He's been out, he's been preaching deliberately to people to go and do exactly as we've seen yesterday in Lancashire. This man is evil.
Well, hang on. Chris, hang on. We don't know the direct link here yet. So,
No link to this one in particular, but this is what this is the sort of thing that he's been preaching to his people to do.
Yeah. Who makes the decision that suddenly the judiciary give out a sentence as long as this? Do they act on advice from the Home Secretary? How does the whole process really work?
Yeah, well, I think there has been a push towards particular judges seeing particular cases and with advice on sentencing. And there must have been, because this is an exceptional sentence, Nigel, as you've said already. But actually, you know, this man is dangerous. And, you know, we don't know exactly how many people have died as a result of his preachings.
No, fair point. Last thought on this, Chris. You know, we're told very often that in our prisons we have a demoralised prison service, very demoralised. The old lags all retiring, youngsters without much experience replacing them. That in many prisons, those that want to preach extremism, Islamist ideology taking over wings of various prisons. Is there a danger that Choudary actually could convert many more people to violent causes inside prison?
Yeah, but there is some control over who he can talk to in prisons. I'd say you're absolutely right. I mean, he will preach to whoever he thinks will go and do his dirty deeds for him. And of course, prison is an exceptional way of controlling those people that are close to him. They have got now prisons which can segregate people like him to stop him from preaching. But he does remain a real danger to society.
Yeah. Well, Chris Phillips, friend of the programme, thank you as ever for coming on. Well, I've never seen Chris Phillips as happy as that. I mean, he feels at last something's happening, which is, I think, good news. Now, yesterday, you know, Rachel Reeves gets up, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, says the Tories have lied to the nation, they've hidden the figures. I mean, it was almost like a sort of old-fashioned Stalinist Soviet show trial. The Tories are the guilty men, and, you know, they tried to answer back, but they couldn't. But tucked in the middle of all of this, and not really getting the coverage that it normally would have done, is the whole scheme for winter fuel payments. Now, just to remind you, Tony Blair brought this in, you know, nearly 25 years ago. There were criticisms that some very rich pensioners were getting a winter fuel allowance. But what she's basically done is said that unless you're on pension credits, you ain't going to get the winter fuel allowance. And this affects 10 million people, the vast majority of whom are not rich or well off. And this comes at a time when gas prices have risen significantly. I have to say, I think it's rather a cruel thing to do, and I certainly won't be voting for it as and when I get the opportunity. There were times in the past where maybe the argument was it wasn't necessary, it had been given as a bribe, but it's almost like Labour is saying, well, we don't care about the pensioners because they're not going to vote for us anyway. And that money that could have gone to pensioners has gone for massive public sector pay rises, including over 22% for junior doctors. I put it to you, Matthew Laza, Labour supporter. This is a very cynical thing she did.
I wouldn't say it's cynical. I'd say it's a sad thing she's done, but she's felt she had to do it because of the state of the public finances. It's not something that anybody in the Labour Party wants to do. As you say, it's a Labour policy. They were introduced by the Labour Party. But, you know, I wonder if you can remember who said about 10 years ago, who's going to be brave enough to tell the wealthier pensioners that their benefits will be cut? Well, it was the Free Enterprise Group of Tory MPs, backed by the IEA, the think tank that then gave us Trussonomics.
Whoa a second.
Yeah.
Yes, but gas prices then were very affordable. They are now. I'm having a row with my supplier at the moment.
I know that.
I might get cut off.
D-Bank now cut off
the bill. Yeah. I can afford it.
Yeah, of course.
But the bill they've sent for my gas for the last year is extortionate.
Yeah, look, it is.
And I'm not a pensioner on a fixed income.
Absolutely, and it is difficult. But sadly, when you look at the figures, fuel poverty now, partly because pensioners as a whole have got richer. That's not to say they're all rich, but pensioner poverty has gone down, whereas family poverty of those in working age has stayed static over the past 25 years. So sadly, the burden has to be shared, and the triple lock on pension, the state pension itself, is absolutely sacrosanct, but in order to make the books balance, I mean, this is not a cheap policy. It costs roughly the same as the whole of the spending on the Royal Navy. I mean, so we're looking, you know, it's $2 billion plus in total, about $1.7 billion for the people who are not going to get it anymore. So it's serious money. I think Rachel's been brave by doing it at the beginning. Clearly, if there was to be another, you know, if fuel prices were to rocket as they did in the early days of the Ukraine war, I know obviously they're still much higher than they were before, then clearly the government would look at more support.
Andrea, you know, you were recently representing a constituency with plenty of pensioners and not many rich ones, I would guess.
Absolutely. But what I found remarkable, Nigel, is that they are punishing the pensioners, but they're spending billions of pounds on the net zero climate change agenda.
Well, which affects electricity prices.
Absolutely.
Doesn't affect gas prices, but it affects... Mind you, the Americans pay half for their gas that we do, because do you know what they do? They frack and produce their own.
I'm pro-fracking. I've always
I know you are.
Nigel, yes.
So
I just think, as you said, fuel prices are majorly high, and why punish them at this time? Why are they trying to push, Miliband trying to push this climate change, etc.? But we need to roll back on that, but they're not going to. And it just feels to me that they are punishing the pensioners, they're punishing those who want to work hard. And look, they're letting people out of prisons. That's probably why Choudhary's got a long sentence, because they're letting these thousands of people out.
Well, it's not all bad then, is it?
Don't argue with prison spaces.
But also having an amnesty on illegals as well, which they mentioned during the election.
Which it looks like. I mean, Matthew, it is an interesting point. She talked about a black hole, a 20 billion black jacques. I watched it all, and Labour were cheering, and the Tories were indignant, and I was just laughing at the whole thing. But there's a real big black hole coming, and it's this. The last auction for offshore wind in the North Sea didn't attract a single bidder.
Absolutely.
Not a single bidder. So, Mike, and I'm not saying you can answer this, but if Ed Miliband has got all these companies that are going to build vast arrays in the North Sea, I wonder what the price is going to be. And I wonder what that means, because all through the election, we were told that renewable energy would give us cheaper bills. It won't, will it?
Well, it potentially can, but it's a big journey to get. It's a big journey to get there. Well, that's the point. I mean, one thing he has done is not many people notice this. He's involved the Crown Estate now, which actually owns the some of the seabed, but he actually wants to get the Crown Estate in developing the fields themselves, because obviously, as you say, in the last auction there were scarcity of bids to never mind net zero. It was zero bids to get us to net zero, and that is the problem. I used to work for Ed Miliband. That is the problem. He is absolutely passionate and committed to this, but it has to be done in a way that delivers for people who are worrying about their energy bills. The problem is the lead time on that is huge, which is why that Labour's probably most populist policy of the election was it scrapped the Tory policy of making you get rid of your boiler. So Labour does have a pledge that it won't force you to get rid of your gas boiler.
Oh, look, Boris Johnson went down this route in a very, very big way, and you could argue that much of what Miliband's saying is not that different to Boris Johnson. But the truth is, decarbonising the grid by 2030 would cost far more for pensioners than losing their winter fuel.
Well, and the truth of the matter is if you listen to people at the sharp end, both the companies themselves, but also the workers via their trade unions, the GMB union and Unite the union, are both absolutely clear that it's physically impossible to do that, partly because there aren't enough cables in the whole world to do it. So I think what we've got to see is a dash of common sense. And the potential conflict between Miliband and the Green lobby and other voices in the government. So that is, watch out for that in the autumn, I say.
Final thought on this. Do you think the Conservatives and opposition will oppose the net zero policies of the Labour Party or support them?
I mean, given the makeup of the what's left of the party, they'll probably support it, but I want them to oppose it.
OK, well, one little observation I've got from just a few weeks in that place is how much the front benches agree on most things, including the next topic we're going to debate. Angela Rayner talking about housing targets today. She wanted to sound radical and bold, and yet they were exactly the same housing targets announced by Boris Johnson 5 years ago. All of that in just a moment.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. The high temperatures, the high humidity will continue across the southern parts through the next few days, and that brings the risk of some thunderstorms. High pressure is generally in control, leading to a lot of fine and settled weather, but there is a weak front across northern parts of Scotland, and here it is a bit fresher than elsewhere. But as we go through the night, do watch out for some hefty showers pushing into southern parts of England. Some of these could have the odd bit of thunder mixed in as well, and there may be be a few pockets of mist and fog, but across southern parts it's really going to be a warm and sticky night. Temperatures really holding up. A much fresher story further north. In fact, in some of the rural spots, the sheltered glens of Scotland, we could fall as low as 4 or 5 Celsius. So a bit of a fresher, chilly start across Scotland first thing, and that front I mentioned earlier bringing some outbreaks of rain to the Northern Isles. Otherwise, it's a dry, bright and sunny story for many. A bit more cloud perhaps across parts of Northern Ireland and some parts of Northern England. A bit of a grey start here, but elsewhere across much of England and Wales, any mist and fog patches that do develop overnight will quickly be burnt away by the sun, and there will be plenty of sunshine and plenty of blue skies. That being said, we are expecting a few more showers to develop as we go into the afternoon, particularly across southern, southeastern parts, and these showers could be fairly intense. Some heavy downpours, some frequent lightning, some thunder and hail, all could lead to some issues. The temperatures are still going to be on the high side, just about getting into the low 30s across the south. Fresher than this, though, further north, similar to today. High teens, low 20s, so feeling warm enough in any sunshine. Into Thursday, and the heavy thunderstorms are going to be a bit more widespread. Across much of England and Wales, there is the risk of some thundery downpours. Meanwhile, across Scotland and Northern Ireland, a few showers are possible, and it is going to be a little bit cloudy at times. Friday's looking like it will be a bit drier for many before something fresher and wetter by the weekend. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So it was Angela Rayner's turn today to say the Labour Party, the Labour government, will build 1.5 million houses over the course of the next 5 years. It's exactly the same pledge that Boris Johnson made after he won the 2019 election. Do you know what is not being debated by either front bench? And it's this. The reason we have to build so many houses is because net migration is running at levels where we have to build a new dwelling, one new dwelling every 2 minutes, just to cope with what's coming into the country, let alone the massive backlogs that we have, genuine backlogs that we have. I'm thinking particularly social housing, or in many parts of the country, the question of affordability of housing. It's a simple matter of demand-supply. The population's risen by 10 million since Mr. Blair came to power, and 85% of that is down to immigration. No wonder we have a problem. Your side never talk about this.
I did. I mean,
you did. You're a rebel.
one of my last debates in Parliament, Westminster Hall debate, which I called for, was the true cost of illegal migration, and we included housing with this. I mean, as an MP, you'll see it as well, Nigel. We see the impact on our streets, on all of our services, on the NHS, on dentistry, and the difference in the policy is, who are these houses going to go to? That's what I'd question.
We don't know.
Is it going to go to the illegal migrants? Is it going to go to those prisoners released? Because it seems to me the Labour Party are the party of those who come from other countries and those who are on benefits.
Well, Rayner has talked, hasn't she, about a large amount of social housing being built. She's talked about the use of brownfield sites being the absolute default, being yes to all of that. Equally, we're going to need some new towns, aren't we?
Yeah, so, I mean, there is an emphasis on new towns, and then today, of course, we've seen the emphasis on the grey belt, which is the grotty bits of the green belt, basically, which councils are going to have to go and declare which bits that they think are the grey belt, and if they don't, the builders are going to be able to challenge them and say, we think this is grey belt, and they're going to be able to take that to government and say, this council's getting in the way. Now, the big clash we're going to see down the line, it all sounds very good today, but from a political point of view, we now have Labour MPs in some very beautiful parts of the country that we never imagined we were going to have Labour MPs with.
Absolutely.
And not only only that, but Labour MPs elected on the back of kind of middle-class...
Can I come in on this point, actually?
Who are going to be NIMBYing away.
No, I mean, I was PPS to Jenrick when he was Housing Minister, actually, Housing Secretary, and that's what I found. We had people like Claire Coutinho, who had something like 97% Greenbelt, who had so much NIMBYism, and I'd be saying, look, we need to build houses. I've got 1% Greenbelt in my area. We need to be protecting where we've got 1% Greenbelt. Now, but the issue what I've got, Nigel, is the fact that they're doubling the cost to apply for planning permission for the regular household. And again, like they're doing with private schools, they're dumbing down on those who are doing the right thing.
One of the ironies will be for Labour, one of the problems that the Conservatives came up against, and I've spoken to developers on this, is a whole raft of EU environmental law, particularly nutrient neutrality. And I know at one point Gove was very keen to get rid of all of this stuff, but they never did. How can a party committed to staying close to the EU rulebook, how will it overcome the court case on this stuff?
It's a party staying close to the environmental lobby as well, actually, not just the EU law book. Look, there are going to be, at the moment, obviously the government's in its honeymoon period. These competing demands are not clashing against each other, but they are going to clash against like Dodgem cars on speed, because you are clearly going to have an issue about whether you water down environmental regulations, because we also have the issue about water supply generally. There's the issue about you're not able to build houses in large parts of the country because we haven't built enough reservoirs. Now, Labour's committed to big infrastructure projects, although no money for that this week, we're told. And yet, of course, the lead time for a reservoir is decades, not years. So you know, what do you do there? And I think on migration, I think that, whatever you come from the political spectrum, you have to acknowledge.
Do you accept my point?
You have to look. Anybody who can do maths has to acknowledge that if you have a population that is continually growing and the demand for housing will continually grow as well, and you're going to have problems of allocation, but you're also going to have that. So I hope that the government will take not just illegal but legal migration seriously. We have seen an emphasis on reskilling British workers over the last couple of weeks.
We hear this talk. Let's see what it comes to. Now, we're going to move on, but we're going to stick with the EU rules. My What the Farage moment is the EU Select Committee, which has been around since 1984, which was, in many ways, Bill Cash's plaything, but did serve some purpose. It was designed that when EU law came to Britain, they would scrutinise it before inevitably it went through. But that Select Committee is being abolished. And that leads many to think, well, this is all part of the Labour plan to cosy up ever closer and perhaps to rejoin a series of EU institutions without actually rejoining the European Union itself. I said in my maiden speech, this is a Remainer Parliament. My guess is between 85 and 90% of MPs voted Remain. At least half the Parliament would rejoin the European Union tomorrow. Well, who better to speak to about the EU Scrutiny Committee and what's happening than Dame Andrea Jenkins, who was a member of it?
I was on it twice, Nigel. I had to come off it when I was a government whip, and then I went back on it afterwards. But if I can just pull up on your first point first, you're correct there. Like the guy who took over from me in the Morley area, he voted Remain. He stood in Harrogate previously, and he wanted a second referendum. It is made up of Remainers.
Well, and the Lib Dems, there's 71 Lib Dems, there's Greens, there's SNP. It's a very Remainer.
The Tories were only 20% of the House, and then you obviously some voted Remain.
Yeah, but half of them.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. I think 90, not 80.
The committee did amazing work under Sir Bill. Recently we've been looking at Gibraltar to make sure they retain, British sovereignty, and we don't see the EU coming in through the back door like we've seen in Northern Ireland. And also, we've been scrutinising the ministers not to have an EU army. But I think anything's on the table under Labour, and I think it's so undemocratic for a great democracy like ours to remove that scrutiny element. I mean, I was also on the Brexit committee where we'd be scrutinising the Brexit deals prior to me going on to this, and it's right. Parliamentarians are elected to scrutinise.
I'm more in favour. Matthew Lauser, your mates.
I am a Remainer myself.
I know you are. Your mates are about to willfully betray the spirit of the greatest democratic exercise in the history of our nation.
Yes.
Well, I don't think they are, because I think, people like me may want an ever closer relationship with the EU, but the chances of us rejoining are a big fat zero. And the chances of anything that resembles rejoining
They're going to do it through the back door.
No, isn't it? It's going to be Brexit in... I mean, frankly...
They don't need to vote. You can just do...
Angela's mob did precious little to take us away from the rule book, which makes it much easier for you guys.
But also, this committee specifically was there to examine the swathes of EU legislation that came through the EU that didn't have to go through the floor of the Commons, and it was a committee to examine those. And now we're not in the EU; it is a superfluous committee. If there was to be a change relationship, there would have to be a Brexit-style committee set up.
Final word is going to go to Andrea.
Thank you, Nigel. First of all, Kemi, she was one of the last people that we interviewed on the committee, and I had to go at her because she didn't rip up all these thousands of EU laws, what was on the statute, and we wouldn't have handed that to Labour to make it easy for them. So that's one point that I'm not happy with, one of our future potential leadership candidates. And also, secondly, I just think the fact that they are stopping this, you do not need a second referendum. They can do statutory instruments. They can have reverse Brexit through the back door.
We can rejoin scientific communities. We can rejoin all sorts of...
We should work together where it makes sense to work together.
Oh, I know that argument all too well.
It'll look so much more different.
Thank Andrew Jenkins. I want to thank Matthew Laza for being my panel this evening, and especially for the first segment of the show. Very difficult subject, very emotional subject to debate in a rational and clear way, and I hope you at home think we did our best with that. Now, a change of gear after the break. GB News is the home of free speech. Therefore, we are going to have a Just Stop Oil spokesman coming on to debate with me, as they want to stop you going on your summer holidays. And I will disagree with Ben Larson, I'm sure, but you know what? Being the channel we are, he will have every right to speak his mind, and that's just as it should be in a free, open society.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very simple.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yeah. If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about it.
You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
They're at it again. Yes, they never go away, do they? Just Stop Oil, yesterday at Gatwick, trying to impede people as they went towards getting their aeroplanes. And, of course, it's the school holes and people are off to Spain and all round the Disneyland or wherever it may be. And today at Heathrow, similar, and a couple of people were arrested. I'm joined by Ben Larson, a Just Stop Oil spokesman. There are a lot of hard-working families, you know, and these days both mum and dad work, and much as holidaying in our country is beautiful and wonderful, it very often lashes with rain, and they want to go to Spain for a couple of weeks, and you want to stop them doing that. Why?
Well, I mean, have you seen the news? The Spanish want to stop them doing that as well.
Well, that's very marginal round the edges in Barcelona.
Listen.
But in general terms, you know, there are tens of millions of flights every year from this country, and it's people going for weekend breaks or summer holes, and you want to stop them doing that.
Just Stop Oil has always been very clear. We're not blocking airports to stop flying, just like we weren't blocking the M25 to stop people driving.
Well, you did.
We did these blockading actions, but that's to send a message to our government. Because when you're rich in this country, you can buy political influence. You can lobby. Jacob knows all about that. You can lobby and you can buy influence. When you're an ordinary person in this country, you really don't have that much power. So Just Stop Oil is about ordinary people coming together, using their bodies to dominate the news cycle and get this issue to the top of the news cycle where it needs to be.
But isn't there something... So basically you're saying that a form of domestic soft terrorism is better than... Just hear me through.
No, I'm sorry. I've heard you through, but to use a word...
No, you haven't heard me through.
To use a word like terrorism...
There is something here called...
Terrorism, Nigel.
Do you accept the democratic process?
Are you serious?
Do you accept the democratic process?
We live in a liberal democracy, and that's a good thing.
Do you accept the democratic process?
Protest is a necessary part
if you
of a liberal
can't
democracy.
win...
But Nigel, no, we're not carrying on.
If you can't win through the ballot box...
You really just looked at me and said terrorism. Are you taking the mickey?
Well, do you accept...
Lockerbie
Do you accept the rule of law?
9/11 is terrorism.
I said soft.
This was orange paint in a departure lounge.
I said soft terrorism. And
What the hell is soft terrorism? Explain that to me.
Do you accept the democratic result of elections in this country?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you accept the rule of law?
Yes.
So why are you going outside of that to try and get change by impeding and stopping people going about their lawful legal activities? That is a form, and if the word's not terrorism, it's obstructionism, but you are behaving in an anti-democratic manner.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you've taken back the word terrorism, because that's ridiculous. The second thing is...
I think it's soft terrorism, but that's by the by. But
what the hell is soft terrorism?
Well, it is saying we are above the law. You are saying we are above the law.
We are not saying we're above the law.
We're above the democratic process, and we will stop you going about your free will to go on holiday, to drive around the M25 and go to a parent's funeral, or whatever it may be. How do you... I mean, number one, I think you're putting yourselves above the law.
No. So you've made this point a number of times now. Just Stop Oil acts in an illegal manner. Yes. Right, Just Stop Oil does break the law in a sense. We use a tried and tested form of civil disobedience. So this is being used in liberal democracies. It's not counter to liberal democracies. It's very much a part to be able to say, I dissent. I think what the government, although it's a legitimate government, is doing is wrong. What the government is doing is leading to suffering for billions of people.
I don't mind you protesting.
Well,
No. I don't mind you protesting. I don't mind you standing in Parliament Square and screaming and shouting or doing whatever you want to do.
When we did that, we got arrested.
But I object to you trying to stop families going on their summer holiday.
Listen, Just Stop Oil is willing to do whatever it non-violently takes, because right now the world is dangerously hot and this government has...
According to you?
No, sorry. According to 98% of scientists.
All right.
Nigel, if you look outside the windows, we're in the GB News bunker right now, but if you have a window and you look out of it, you can see what's happening around the world. It's not normal, and it makes sense that people are freaked out.
And what percentage of global carbon emissions comes from the UK?
a huge amount is financed by the City of London, which this government has control.
What percentage of global CO2 comes from the UK?
And historically, we're one of the biggest emitters of all time.
No,
so
we're
that's
not.
why.
No, we're not. China has emitted more CO2 in the last 10 years than we have since the dawn of time.
I said one of the biggest emitters of all time historically. And that's why this government has a special responsibility because of our place in the
We have cut carbon emissions
Hang on, let me finish.
by 50% since 1990.
Let me finish. This government has a historic responsibility to sign a fossil fuel treaty with governments across the world to say we need to phase out this stuff, just like we did with nuclear warheads.
Ben, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
What should we do then?
Everybody accepts.
Should we just let the wildfires take us? Should we just sink under the sea levels?
We can encourage India, we can encourage China, we can encourage them to burn less coal.
All right, let's do it then. And it has to start at home. You know what? It has to start at home. Otherwise, they're just going to call us hypocrites.
This year, the world's going to burn 4 billion tonnes of coal. It's a number so mind-blowing, we can't even get our minds around it. Aren't we better just to accept that whilst we can encourage other people to do it, we should not deindustrialise, we should not make people poorer, and we should not stop them going on holiday.
Who's talking about deindustrialisation? Green energy is cleaner, it's cheaper, and it's clearly better for communities.
Work.
What do you mean it doesn't work?
It's intermittent.
Nigel, I think your brain is intermittently working.
When the wind doesn't blow, these things produce nothing.
OK, well, then that's why we've figured out how to balance an electricity grid a long time ago. Your arguments are totally outdated, and they're not shared by...
We will be using oil and gas. We will be using oil and gas in 2050, even if we go headlong for net zero. And everyone accepts that, apart from Just Stop Oil. Ben, it's good to have you on to debate.
Go to juststopoil.org, sign up now.
Jacob, there we are. You are one of the rich, influential people in this country, according to Ben Larson.
Well, I'm not influential anymore because I'm no longer a member of Parliament, so, you know, my influence is gone.
What are you debating tonight?
Oh, well, I've got Liz Truss on to talk about this fascinating report from the Bank of England, where the Bank of England says it was the Bank of England that damaged the economy around the time of Liz Truss's mini budget, not Liz. That it was their regulatory failure, their administrative incompetence. And what? Bailey's still there, because you can't vote him out, whereas you can vote out the government in charge.
No. Fascinating debate. Well, before all of that, let's see how warm the weather's going to be tomorrow with Alex Burkill.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. The high temperatures, the high humidity will continue across southern parts through the next few days. And that brings the risk of some thunderstorms. High pressure is generally in control, leading to a lot of fine and settled weather. But there is a weak front across northern parts of Scotland, and here it is a bit fresher than elsewhere. But as we go through the night, do watch out for some hefty showers pushing into southern parts of England. Some of these could have the odd bit of thunder mixed in as well, and there may be a few pockets of mist and fog, but across southern parts it's really going to be a warm and sticky night. Temperatures really holding up. A much fresher story further north. In fact, in some of the rural spots, the sheltered glens of Scotland, we could fall as low as 4 or 5 Celsius. So a bit of a fresher, chilly start across Scotland first thing, and that front I mentioned earlier bringing some outbreaks of rain to the Northern Isles. Otherwise, it's a dry, bright and sunny story for many. A bit more cloud perhaps across parts of Northern Ireland and some parts of Northern England. A bit of a grey start here, but elsewhere across much of England and Wales, any mist and fog patches that do develop overnight will quickly be burnt away by the sun, and there will be plenty of sunshine and plenty of blue skies. That being said, we are expecting a few more showers to develop as we go into the afternoon, particularly across southern southeastern parts, and these showers could be fairly intense. Some heavy downpours, some frequent lightning, some thunder and hail all could lead to some issues. The temperatures are still going to be on the high side, just about getting into the low 30s across the south. Fresher than this, though, further north, similar to today. High teens, low 20s, so feeling warm enough in any sunshine. Into Thursday, and the heavy thunderstorms are going to be a bit more widespread. Across much of England and Wales, there is the risk of some thundery